I've joined something. I don't know what it is.
Hey, Shaitan, can you hear me now? Who is it? Do you have Dimitri?
Hello.
Hey, Dimitri, how's it going?
It's okay, thank you.
Welcome. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Well, I can hear you okay.
Great. Um, so I was just speaking to Chetan, hopefully getting everyone to join in. When are you presenting?
Um, well, I don't know. I mean, do you want to go with one session today or the two sessions in parallel? I don't know if we're going to get too confused.
Um, so this is something that kind of I think we've all got a bit jumbled up just because I wasn't originally involved in the kind of organization of the day, and I thought it was kind of Chetan and Izzy's kind of thing. And just last night, Izzy was like, "Oh, we should do one after the other." So it was a bit kind of like, "Oh, okay, well, why don't we just or join them all together?" I don't know. So it's really up to you guys if that's something that you feel is fine. I don't think it should be too hard. Do you have your slides ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I've never used this Google Hangouts, so um,
Mhm.
I think to be honest, wouldn't it be easier to just do both of them consecutively?
We could, but we've just kind of set up the two now, and we've kind of got a good group of people on each one, or ready to go, ready to join each one. So I think it might be a bit of a runaround to just say to everyone, "Oh, no, it's going to be one
Okay, well, fine.
after
Okay,
the
well,
other."
if that's what you guys have done, then
Yeah.
then that's
Do you want me to give you a little run through of how I think it's going to work?
yeah,
So you're coming on after Thomas Drake, right?
yeah.
Thomas for a little bit, and then Dimitri. Okay. So basically, if you could go to, do you see an option for screen share in your top left?
Uh, there's live
Hmm. And that is
uh,
is that in your top right or top left?
showcase, screen share.
Yeah, screen share. It's like a little green thing. And then if
Oh,
you choose whichever one is your slides, and then that should come up.
so there.
There you go. And then if you click down on your bottom screen, you should have an option for presenting to the whole group. There should be a little arrow. In fact, I think I can do that for you. 1 second, because I'm running the call. There you go. So now you're presenting to everyone, and they just join in, and they can see it like that.
Oh right, okay.
And that's it. And that's what I was going to do for everyone else, and just kind of mediate it like that. So Thomas would then come on and do his talk, and then he'd then stop screen sharing, stop presenting to everyone, and then just flip to you and do the same thing. And then that way you can. So it should work out okay theoretically.
Okay,
Um,
fine.
um, this is me learning how to do this last night, so always good things to do things at the last minute. Good. And then I don't know if is Thomas. Are you in contact with Thomas, or if he's? Should we?
I'll try and give him a call.
Yeah, and then I could do the same thing with him, and then we could be happy and good to go.
And so who's going to sort of moderate this? Yourself?
I'm happy to. I think it was Chetan thought Thomas would, but I'm more than happy to. Because we're missing an
Okay.
introduction, aren't we? We've got a kind of from the rough plan that I've got. I've got advanced research skills one, introduction, speaker unknown, and then Thomas on what is GlobalSurg, Thomas again on understanding statistics, and then you're on how not to get published, and then we've got questions, and then the speaker for that is faculty. Have
And
you?
throughout this whole thing, can anyone talk, or is it just
So I'm going to mute everyone else. I'm not quite sure how it works on that front, but I have the power to mute everyone. So I'm
okay?
I'm going to if they try and speak, I can start muting them. So
Okay, fine. All right. Well, shall we stop this then, and I'll give Tom a call.
yeah, why not? I'm going to hang on this line just to keep it live and going. But yeah, you can either mute up and then call Thomas and carry about until you get back on.
Okay, I'll just put it on mute then.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri.
So I think Tom said he's going to dial in.
Okay, good. Yeah, and Chetan is supposed to be dialing in on the call. They should all have the invite. So I think from what I can see at the bottom, we have some people already listening in. So hello to those people. But because I've invited you, you are now speakers. And then for the other people who are joining the call, they can kind of hear the broadcast happening. So it's a bit of a different scenario.
So for anyone listening, we're learning how to use this technology.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. Dimitri, where are you based?
Birmingham.
Ah, very good. Cool.
How about yourself?
I'm at St George's, South London.
Right. And how do you like South London?
Oh, it's a joy. Every day is a joy in South London. It's a magical experience. No, it's good. I like it. St George's is nice. See if I can get. You know, if Tom's having any joy being able to get onto the call, or is he?
He said he'd got the invite, so
Okay.
hopefully.
Hi, Chetan. So have you got the invite through? Okay. I sent it to your Gmail one. Are you on the Global Surgery one? Okay. So the other, I think Tom has got the invite. So maybe it's just taken a while to come through.
Right.
What Gmail address? Let me just check. Yeah, that's the one. Let me see. Let me just hold on 2 seconds. Dimitri, how did you join this call?
Anil added me.
Who added you?
Anil.
Anil added you onto the call.
I think so. But
Okay.
he's not even on the call, so I'm not sure how this is working.
Yeah. Let me try and re-add everyone one more time and see if that works.
Okay.
And if not, we'll try something else. 2 seconds, Chetan. I'm going to try emailing everyone one more time. All right.
Hi, Tom. No, we can't hear you. It says that you're on it in terms of, like, on the. Is your thing muted, maybe? No.
So he's currently listening, is he?
Yeah. So Tom says he can hear what we're saying.
Okay.
But he can't. We can't hear him.
How did we add you on to speak?
I'm sending you the one that Anil sent to me. See if that works.
Okay. So Neil invited you in, or how did it?
Are you in?
No, we still don't have a mitten. We should see in the are you in contact with Anil, and maybe she could find out how she brought you in?
He says he doesn't know.
Okay.
Tom says he's nearly done it.
He's nearly done it. Let me call Chetan back.
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
So what's Tom trying to do to talk? Just because I can't. We have Tom.
Hello.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, finally. Sorry about that. That's a
No
nightmare.
worries.
Some maybe funny browser. Cool. So
You're on. Hold on, just got Chetan just calling me. Hey, Chetan. I now have Dimitri and Tom on the advanced skills one. So Tom, can you just can you humor me and talk me through exactly what you did to join?
so I'm on a funny browser on a Linux thing. You have to install some kind of extra bit to your browser sometimes.
I see. Okay.
I ended up, if you go onto Google Plus and then you go through Hangouts, it works better like that rather than trying to go through the link. Yeah, which doesn't make any sense, but hey.
Okay, so Chetan, yeah, it's you have to kind of get an extra bit onto your browser. So there's like an extra kind of add-on essentially. I don't know, it should pop up at the top, but you should have like I think Tom went through Hangouts on his Google Plus. Does that make sense? So Tom, you went onto Google Plus and went into Hangouts, did you?
Yeah. So if you have a Gmail account, if you go to the app selector at the top,
Yeah.
and then click Google Plus, and then you'll see Hangouts on the left-hand side tab. If you click on the green Hangouts thing, it should kind of set up Hangouts for you, and then do that. It's just I didn't have Hangouts on my university thing, so.
Hi Chetan. Sorry, hold on. Oh, there you go. We have Chetan.
Aha!
Oh, I'm in.
You're in.
Yeah, you're in. Hello, Chetan. Other thing, can everyone see my screen at the moment?
Not yet. So I've got Dimitri as the.
I can
kind of
see your
main-
screen, Tom.
Oh, cool.
I can see someone's hand.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I can see it
that's
just
my
down in the
screen.
bottom. So if I do this and just do present to everyone, then you should see. Then Tom should be on a kind of big screen. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got a big screen here, so I can then you can see things playing there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay, let me call Midden. So I've also got a call from Izzy. So I'm going to leave this one. If you guys are okay to go ahead with this, then I'll call Izzy and I'll join that one. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. Can you invite
Cheers.
Anil in as well? Tom, can you speak? Can you talk through Anil how to do this?
Yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'll give him a ring now.
All right. Bye.
All right, we're getting there. To anyone who else is listening on the broadcast, we're having some technical difficulties, and we'll be done momentarily, ready to go. Is someone in contact with Anil as well?
I think Tom is.
Great.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome, brilliant. So yes, we'll start without Anil, if that's okay.
Okay.
I've just spoken to him on the phone. Brilliant. So are we all present? The people who are going to be in this session.
Yeah, I think at the moment. So sorry. Introduce myself, Tom. I'm Mike. And I'm a student at St George's. I'm kind of hosting the call on behalf of Izzy Marks, who kind of got me involved last night, and we kind of worked out how to do Google Hangouts vaguely.
Brilliant.
So at the moment, it's got Dimitri and Tom, who are our speakers, and then we have some kind of viewers at the bottom as well, who can hear what's going on, but can't actively present. So I can kind of leave it in your hands, and I'll be in charge of kind of seeing if you present to everyone.
That sounds brilliant. Thank you very much, Mike. So we should go around introduce ourselves really. I'm Tom. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Sheffield, and I'm involved in GlobalSurg as well as StarSurg as well, which are the collaboratives, research collaboratives where anyone in the world or the UK can get involved and do some really kind of exciting national or international research into surgery. Dimitri?
Hi, my name's Dimitri. I'm a junior surgical trainee in Birmingham in the UK, and I'm also involved in these projects.
Brilliant. So for this session, we're going to start off just by kind of introducing a bit about GlobalSurg, about how you can get involved, and how kind of really important it is to be doing research in global surgery at the moment. And then Dimitri will talk a bit about. We'll then both talk about research skills, and Dimitri will talk about how not to get published, and I'll talk about a little bit about statistics and how we used it in GlobalSurg, the first GlobalSurg study, which we'll introduce you to. Now, is that okay with everyone? Okay.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see my screen at the moment. Are we all okay with that?
Yeah, there we go, perfect.
So apparently we didn't have sound to that.
You could hear a little bit of sound, but I think it's all we could hear was your microphone. You get the gist
Okay.
of the video, but yeah.
Mike, do you have an option for sound on my computer?
I'm not
In the
sure.
control room. Hang on a second. Settings. So I should. Can anyone hear that beeping?
No.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, not to worry. We can supply the link to that, and you can watch that video. It should have sound, and it does explain everything that basically happens about GlobalSurg. So I'll do that now. GlobalSurg is a international collaboration of clinicians and doctors. I'll just get this off my screen. Hang on a second. So we should have this. Yes, so GlobalSurg is an international collaboration of clinicians, doctors, and students. And our first study, GlobalSurg 1, took place last year, and we managed to recruit over. So we had 10,700 patients across 58 countries, and we had across 58 countries, and we managed to recruit 10,000 patients. And what we really did, we looked at the outcomes of emergency surgery after laparotomy, and we found that patients were more likely to die in less developed countries for the same kind of patient risk. I'll just show you my presentation now.
No, I think we just lost Tom somehow. So take a chance to say hello to Ed. Can you hear us?
I can, hi.
Hi there, Ed. Yeah, I'm Mike. I'm one of the medical students from St George's. I'm kind of hosting this call. We had Tom about to join us, and I think his call was potentially dropped. We've just got him back now.
Sorry, the call dropped.
No worries. If I can present you to everyone.
Right.
Okay. Ed, I hope you don't mind. I've just muted the microphone because there's a lot of background noise on the go, and I'll kind of pop you back on potentially just after Tom's finished.
Okay, brilliant. Right, we're there. Sorry about these technical difficulties. Okay, so what is GlobalSurg? GlobalSurg is an international collaboration of students and clinicians across the world. Over the last year, we've had over 1,500 clinicians and students who came together and collected data, looking at on a study looking at outcomes after emergency abdominal surgery. And we really run kind of quite novel and important global studies in surgery, looking at difference in outcomes across countries, really. So our first study should hopefully get published in a few weeks' time, and that will really just show how much of a difference there is across countries, really. And we primarily looked at mortality, and unsurprisingly, mortality in patients who undergo surgery in places with a low development index, if you like, such as Africa and the poorer parts of the world, did a lot worse after surgery. And really, the beauty of these studies is anywhere anyone can get involved and contribute to a patient-changing piece of audit and research. So this is a picture of who participated in the first GlobalSurg study, and you can see in the UK there we've got quite a big gathering of people, and also surprisingly in Egypt and Peru and South America delivered some fantastic amounts of patients and some really kind of exciting relationships to build as well. And so what we want to do for our next project, which is GlobalSurg 2, is looking at wound infection. And so we found that in the first GlobalSurg study, that wound infection rates were almost double in countries, in poorer countries. You're more likely to suffer a wound infection after you had surgery. So we're really going to kind of nail down and find out really what is causing this, and how we can potentially change it and improve outcomes after surgery. And so that's GlobalSurg 2, and you can find out a lot more about GlobalSurg and what we do by visiting the website, which is www.globalsurg.org. If you'd like to register for the next study, you can also log onto the website, and there's a protocol, there's links, and you can email your country's local lead, or you can even apply to become your country's local lead through the website there, and then through January through to April, we'll be collecting data, and you can contribute data to the study anywhere in the world, as long as you're doing gastrointestinal surgery, so anything in the colon, small bowel, stomach, anything like that. And you can contribute patients to this study, and hopefully at the end we'll have a paper where you'll be cited as a collaborator and as a co-author there. And we can build upon that and really deliver an impactful study that's going to go on and change how we handle surgical site infection or wound infection across the world. So now we'll kind of hand over to Dimitri. I'll stop showing my screen. Who will talk a little bit about our research skills course. And here we've got a section on statistics and a section on how to not get published. Dimitri will tell you now.
So would you like me to start my talk, or tell about the recent skills course in general? Sorry.
Could you discuss a little bit about the research skills course, and then we can kind of go into your presentation, if that's okay.
Okay. So the Star Surge Group is the UK's student-led research network, which we started in 2013, and the first meeting we had was in September of that year, when we got together some medical students from across the country. About 100 students came to the Royal College of Surgeons in London, and that year it was only half a day meeting, and we introduced our first research study that the students would be completing that year. But it was a really successful meeting, and so after that we reflected on how we could help our collaborators get more value out of coming to our meetings and equip them with some of the skills that might be useful when they're completing both the GlobalSurg studies and their own studies into the future. Because really important to note that the aim of the GlobalSurg and GlobalSurg is to get students to be able to do their own studies in the future. And so the following year, we introduced the Research Skills course into that annual meeting at the Royal College, and we've been developing it ever since. And we've now delivered it all across the country, in Dublin, in Ireland, Belfast in Northern Ireland, in Edinburgh in Scotland, and some of the cities in England. And so we've spent quite some time refining it, and so it's a great pleasure to now be able to bring it to an even broader audience all across the world. So I think that introduces the course, unless anyone's got any questions about that. Tom?
No, that sounds really good, Dimitri. Thank you.
Okay. So Tom, I think you were going to give your talk next, or would you like me to do mine?
Could you do yours first, Dimitri, please?
Okay. So I think that's sharing the slides now. Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, we can all see it. It's good, and you're presenting to everyone as well, so should be all working.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to give you a talk for a few minutes now about how not to get published. So hopefully what you'll take away from this is how you can get published, because that's the aim. So I think the most important thing when you're looking to publish a scientific article is to choose the right journal to send your article to. Because if you choose the wrong journal, you might be at very high risk of getting a rejection. Whereas if you choose the right journal, your chances go up. So the first consideration is that you probably want to target what we call PubMed citable journals. So you might be familiar with PubMed. You could think of it as being a search engine on the internet where you can search scientific journals, and it's probably the most used database of medical literature. And so if you want to have if you want your work to have some kind of impact, you really want to be in a journal that's going to be cited and indexed on PubMed, because that's how other researchers elsewhere will find your work primarily. In addition, in many countries, you will only get points on job applications if your article was published in a PubMed index journal. If it's not a PubMed journal, you might not get as much credit for it. So the way to find out whether or not your target journal is indexed is you can find this out online. And if you search for PubMed index journals, you'll find a website that you can see the link there in the browser that comes up, and that has a complete list of all the journals that they index. The next thing you might think about is what's the impact factor of your journal. So for anyone who's not familiar with impact factors, it's a method of measuring the importance of the work a journal has published over the last 1 year or 5 years. And it's worked out according to how many citations on average each article in that journal has had. So the idea being that if a journal is publishing lots of very high quality work, then that work will be getting lots of citations from other researchers who are citing that work in their own articles. And that will push up your impact factor. Impact factors can vary very widely. So this is a list of the top impact factor journals in surgery. You can see that the top journal in the surgical world is the Annals of Surgery with an impact factor of just over 8. But most surgical journals will have impact factors of between 1 and 3. But you can see that there is a selection that are higher than that. And then if you want to go for really high impact factor journals, you're thinking about things like the Lancet, which has an impact factor, I think, of approximately 15 to 20, and the top journal overall is the New England Journal of Medicine, with an impact factor of about 45. So this is just a way of working out where in the pecking order the journal of interest is. You also want to think about whether you want to submit your work to a journal that's a general journal or a specialist journal. So a general journal would be something like the British Medical Journal, which publishes work all across every single medical field and surgical field. Then there are very specialist journals. So, for example, the Journal of Crohn's Colitis is a journal which specializes in research about Crohn's disease. So that's very specific to a very small area of surgery. And then there are some journals that are sort of somewhere in the middle. So, for example, the British Journal of Surgery will publish research about most areas of abdominal surgery. So when you're thinking about which journal you're going to send your work to, you might want to have a think about who do you want to read your work. If really you think that your work's going to appeal to colorectal surgeons, then maybe a colorectal journal like Colorectal Disease would be a good fit, because then the people reading that journal are the people interested in your work. There's no point submitting something about Crohn's disease to a gynecological journal, because they won't be interested at all. I think you also need to be realistic. So general journals like the medical journal are a very factor. They're very selective about what they publish. So if you think your work isn't the highest quality work ever, then you might not want to waste your time submitting to high impact factor general journal, because it might be better to aim your work towards a niche journal that will be interested specifically in what you've written. You also need to think about what kind of article you've written. So some journals will publish any different type of article you like. However, other journals will only publish, for example, case reports. So if it's a case report journal, then don't send them a systematic review. Equally, many journals will not publish case reports, and some journals will not publish reviews. So you need to have a careful think about what kind of articles does this journal accept, and how does your article fit into that. And finally, here's a tip that if you're struggling to think of a good journal to submit to, have a look at the other articles that you've referenced in your journal, in the article you've written, and what journals publish those articles, because you're obviously citing things that people who've written about similar topics, so that will give you an idea of what journals have actually in the past published. So the most important tip I can give you is to make sure that you read the instructions to authors. Every journal online will have a page which gives very detailed instructions on what articles they publish and their regulations for how those articles should be. So every journal will have slightly different rules in terms of how many words they want, what sections those articles should have, whether you can have tables, figures, and all of that. So it's really important that you read all that very carefully before you start writing your article, because the commonest reason for something to get rejected is that you just haven't read the instructions and you've submitted the wrong thing. So for the rest of this talk, I'll highlight some common issues with articles that mean that they get rejected. And these slides are based on some slides that Derek Alderson has presented previously, and he is the editor of the British Journal of Surgery. So you can trust what he says, even if you don't quite trust what I say. So the first thing is that isn't scientifically credible, then it's unlikely that any journal is going to want to publish it. And so it's really important that you design your study very carefully and consider what sort of article is going to actually be of interest to other people reading it. And then it's a question of how you present the work you've done. So for example, you need to have a clear hypothesis. So what hypothesis was your study testing? If you haven't got a hypothesis in the first place, you're setting yourself up to fail. And if you haven't described your hypothesis clearly, again, people will find that confusing. They will worry that your study wasn't designed very well. So a really good tip is that when you're writing the introduction to your article, to include in that introduction what the study's aims were, and write that very clearly. And again, when you're writing the abstract, put the study's primary aim in the introduction section of the abstract, and then everyone will know exactly what you're doing. Similarly, if your article isn't original or interesting, then by definition people will not be very excited by it. So again, part of this is about how you sell the work you've done. So even if you've done a really interesting piece of work, if you haven't explained to people why it's interesting, if they're not experts in that field, they might find it more difficult to judge that. So in the introduction, you should explain very clearly the previous work that's been done in this field and why you've come up with the hypothesis that you have. Why is that important? And then in the discussion, you want to explain briefly what you found and how that fits into the evidence base that already exists and what's new and what it changes. If your work is about something that's not relevant to human disease, so for example, if it's a study done in mice, then obviously the interest will instantly reduce. And it might be that for that kind of basic science work in mice, for example, you might want to aim for the basic science journals rather than a clinical journal. And it's really important that when you're designing your study to think about what endpoints you're going to use. So for example, if you wanted to find out whether using one type of skin prep, chloro prep, or iodine prep is better for preparing patients for surgery when you cover them with the paint to disinfect their skin, if the outcome you were looking at was the mortality rate of those patients after surgery by 30 days, that wouldn't be very useful because it's unlikely that the type of prep you use will affect mortality. That's not why people use prep. They use it to reduce the risk of wound infections. So the primary endpoint for that study should be about the wound infection rate. So if you've used a different endpoint, then instantly your research is less interesting and less relevant. So when you're designing your study, think carefully about what's really important about this research question. What are the key worries that patients and doctors have? And make sure that you're addressing that. Having a bad title will also not favor, because that's the first thing that people read. So it's the first impression they get about your work. You want to make sure that you have a short title and that it doesn't give the results. Some editors get very upset about article titles that give the results of the study in the title. So have a look at other articles and have a look at what their titles were and try and frame yours in a similar way. And a tip that you might have here is that if you've had to apply for ethical approval, you'll have already written a title for your study, and that was before you knew what the results were going to be. So that might be a good way to go back and have a look at that title and see whether you can adapt that. The abstract is really important because before the editors read anything else, after they've read the title, they're going to read the abstract. And if they don't find the abstract interesting, they might reject your article straight away because they just decide that it's not worth their time reading the rest because the abstract was written badly or gave them information that they didn't find interesting. So make sure that you write your abstract really well. Look at the instructions to the authors and have a look at what sections in the abstract that journal requires. Generally, they will require 4 sections: the background, the methods, results, and the conclusion, but sometimes some journals will ask for something different. So make sure that rather than assuming that your journal wants those 4 sections, have a look at the instructions and make sure that what you're writing fits. And essentially what you're trying to answer in that abstract is why did you do the work you did, which is the background, how you went about answering the question that you set, in terms of what patients you included, when you included them, how you included them, what happened to those patients, and how you measured the outcomes. So you're not aiming to give the whole of your study design away, because you've only got a limited number of words in the abstract, typically 200. Again, that's something you want to check, because there's sometimes less or more words in the abstract that a particular journal wants. So check. So you want to explain just the core things about what was important about your study's design. The results will give the figures in terms of how many patients you recruited and what happened to those patients, what were the outcomes. And finally, the conclusion should just be a couple of lines explaining how we can apply the results that you've obtained to the real world. Does it mean that we should stop offering a particular treatment? Does it suggest that there's a need for further research in this area? Perhaps it suggests that a randomized controlled trial is a good idea because you've just proven that it's feasible to recruit to that trial in your study. So make sure that when you're writing the abstract and your main paper that the right information is in the right section. Don't put the results in the methods. Don't put the conclusion in the background. Make sure that it's all in the right order. So the methods, for example, should not be describing how many patients you had. It shouldn't be describing the outcomes those patients had. All of that information should be in the results. Obviously, make sure that you don't exceed the word limit, and the abstract shouldn't be referenced. So again, the next problem that people might have is that they've just written the article poorly. So they might not have given enough detail. So every clinical study should give a description of how they obtained ethical approval. Was ethical approval necessary? And if so, what committee gave them approval? Should give an idea of what patients were included and what you did to those patients. So again, avoid unnecessary repetition, which is perhaps what I'm doing now. But avoid repeating the same information in the conclusion that was already in the results. And the results don't include information that is already included in tables and figures. You can have a little bit of repetition, but don't write out exactly the same information in the results section as in the tables. And this might not be a reason for your article to get outright rejected, but certainly this would be something that would cause the editors to require substantial revisions, as if your writing was poor. So make sure that the sentences you write are not too long. If you read the sentence out loud to yourself and you find that you have to stop for breath, probably that means that the sentence is too long. So remember, you're aiming for scientific language, not for some sort of amazing novel. You want to be concise and precise. Don't use overcomplicated language, and avoid unnecessary words. So just give the bare essentials. Don't use jargon that's very specific to a very small field of people, because it means that other people, when they read your article, will really struggle to understand. So try and explain everything to the level that an average doctor would understand. Avoid abbreviations. If you use abbreviations, then before you use them for the first time, write it out in full and then put in brackets what your abbreviation is. But if possible, try and avoid them, because the abbreviations that you are familiar with, other people might struggle to understand what they mean and get confused. Don't change from the third to the first person. So if you started writing that we set up a study and we recruited the patients, don't later start talking about yourself in the first person, saying that we recruited the patients and I performed this test on them. People will find that annoying. Don't mix the present tense with the past tense. Again, that people find that annoying and confusing. And obviously make sure that your punctuation, your spelling is all perfect, because again, people will notice that. And often if somebody notices a spelling mistake, they will focus on that spelling mistake for the next 10-20 seconds, and they will not take into their minds whatever it is that you've written, because they're just annoyed by the spelling mistake. So having perfect writing isn't going to make your article get published, but it's going to remove the barriers to getting published. Don't exaggerate the importance of your work. Again, people will find this very annoying. It's unlikely that your work is going to change the world. So don't talk about it as if it's the most important discovery that's ever been made. Make sure that you put everything in context. And finally, just make sure that you follow the instructions. Follow the instructions online from the journal, the generic, and then when you get feedback from reviewers and editors, follow their advice and their instructions. If the editor tells you to revise your article prior to resubmission and to reduce the word count by a third, then make sure that you reduce the word count by a third, not by 10%. Do exactly as they say. Because if you don't, they'll just reject your article and you will have wasted your time. So that comes to the end of the talk. So in summary, make sure that you have instructions online for the journal that you're targeting. Make sure that you choose your article carefully. You choose your journal carefully, so that the work that you've done is a good fit for what that journal would want to publish in terms of the topic, the type of article, and the impact that article is likely to have. And finally, make sure that the way you've written an article is as clear, concise, and precise as possible, so as to minimize the risk of confusing people and them wondering what the point of your article was. So thank you very much for listening, and that comes to the end of the talk.
Thanks very much, Dimitri. That was really, really interesting and insightful. I've just had a look, and there's 35 people watching this and 108 people watching the course research skills. So thank you very much for attending. Dimitri, just an interesting question. If you were, say, someone who'd never really written an article before for a journal, what would be your main piece of advice on how to kind of get into somewhere?
I think if you've not a previous research article, then you probably difficult to write your first article on your own. So make sure that you get some advice and help. First of all, with choosing the study topic and designing your study, and obviously with writing your study. So it might be that you think the best thing is, before you start writing your own articles, perhaps to get involved with helping somebody else to write that article. Talk to the more senior students and the lecturers at your medical school. Find out who's doing some work, get involved in it, and learn from getting involved in it. That would be my best advice.
That's fantastic. That's exactly what I did, really, and I'm sure that's how you managed to get to the heights you are. So shall we move on to the statistics part of the session? Is that okay?
Sounds good. I'm just going to put you on to present it to everyone, Tom.
Fantastic. I should be sharing my screen now. There we go.
Yeah, I wonder, Dimitri, I think you're still sharing your screen. Do you mind just unsharing if possible?
Oh, right, yeah. How do we do that?
There we go. Cheers,
Okay,
Dimitri.
can you see my screen, everyone on the call?
Yeah.
Brilliant, fantastic. So yeah, I'm Tom, and I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics, which is something I'm quite interested in. I'll just see if we're going to work. There we go. Okay, so when I at medical school, I remember in my first couple of years, we had lots of lectures on statistics, and I didn't really get it. I thought it was very confusing, a little bit boring as well. Since then, I've kind of seen the light, really, And statistics, if you don't look at it properly, and if you don't look at it in a simple way, it can get very, very confusing very, very quickly. And it's important to kind of break it down. And like Dimitri was saying, you need to know how to translate your results into a piece of work which is easily understandable by the average doctor. And statistics is just really one of the ways of doing it. So statistics really are a way of describing your observations or your findings of your studies using numbers. So usually we describe something using words. So for example, here are two cakes. There's one with white on top on the left, and there's one with blue on the right. But we can describe them using numbers, and we can say there's two cakes, there's a certain percentage of this, there's a certain percentage of that. And then that can really translate quite nicely into studies as well. One of the most tricky things is how if you've gone out and you've collected all your fantastic data and you don't know how to kind of process things, you don't know how to do statistics, where do you start? How do you do statistics on your data? I think the most important thing really is simple is often the best. So if you can describe something using percentages and numbers, that is probably the best way of doing it. And you don't really need to do lots of complicated statistical tests. And we won't really cover that in this talk because it's a lot of time, and also it gets very complicated very, very quickly. And what I really want to do here is just show you how you can kind of present your work in the best way possible, in the simplest way possible, and make it publishable. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we did for GlobalSurg 1 as well, and how we can apply that. So first of all, the most important tip I can say is good design is equal to better statistics. And very much like Dimitri was saying, if you have a well-designed study that you can say that this is the result because of this, and you're not trying to do lots of funny things, and it's very clear what you're doing, it'll mean your analysis is a lot better. So the next most important thing is that you have a very valid, plausible comparisons. It's no good picking two factors out of the air and saying, oh, you know, paracetamol use in people who are having their appendixes out makes them sick because of some kind of other random factor like the weather, or it needs to be a useful comparison. For example, there's this really good website called Spurious Correlations, and this really illustrates quite nicely. It takes two things that are completely unrelated, and it kind of puts it in a graph type format, and it's quite funny, some of the things. But this one is looking at the films that the actor Nicolas Cage appeared in, the number of people who drowned by falling into a swimming pool. And if you think about it, if you look at the graph, you say, oh yeah, that's kind of those two things, whatever they might be, are quite related. And they follow the same kind of trend in time. But then you kind of look at the words, what they say, and you say, well, the actor Nicolas Cage isn't necessarily pushing lots of people into a pool during each film he makes. So they're completely unrelated things, and you need to keep it focused and relevant. One of the main issues with statistics, and the things we need to think about in our study design that affect the analysis, is something called selection bias. And bias is where things that might affect your study that you potentially aren't controlling for might influence the results and lead to errors or different conclusions, and might not reflect what's actually going on. So selection bias is where patients will undergo a specific set of treatments or tests due to the characteristics of them or their condition. So, for example, if you look at patients who've got problems with their kidneys or on dialysis, or have heart problems, or quite old, doctors won't prescribe as many non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs to them, because it's known that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs can lead to kidney injury and kidney damage, and so it's quite difficult to compare people who are having those drugs with kind of a young fit and healthy population. It doesn't really work, and you've got that selection bias there, where certain patients will get a specific treatment, whereas other patients won't. So you need to. That is one of the most important criteria for thinking about when you come to analyse your study. And it might be that is you can't get rid of that. You can't say, oh look, we can get that out of the way. You might just have to say in your results, this is a limitation. So we'll have a look at an example now. Getting antibiotics after an operation. So we're going to have a think about coronary artery bypass, so a heart bypass, and we're going to look at how many people have died at 90 days. So we do this lovely study, and you've done a fantastic observational study. You've collected data from their notes on 500 patients. Wow, that's fantastic. And you've noticed that 100 patients got antibiotics and 400 patients didn't. And you can see here that of the people who got antibiotics, 20% of them died at 90 days, whereas in the people who didn't get antibiotics, only 1% of them died. And so you're thinking, oh dear, I found something amazing there. The antibiotics seem to cause people to die after they've had their heart operation. And that's not quite true, because you go back and you look at these records and you say, oh, actually, those 100 patients were a lot sicker. They had lots of infections and pneumonias and things like that, and they were quite old compared to the other 400 who didn't need them. And so that's a big selection bias there. So the sicker patients got antibiotics, and so it didn't really make sense. So you went to your supervisor, who said, oh wow, these results, we need to have a look at them. And didn't quite understand selection bias, and you said, well, I know the way to do this. I'm going to do a randomized trial. So this takes away the choice from the doctors or from the people who are giving out the treatments. So you stop that selection bias, and you randomly allocate patients to the treatment groups. So you say half of you, according to your random number, either 1 or 2, so group 1, group 2, will get antibiotics. So number 1s will get antibiotics and number 2s won't get antibiotics, and we'll see what happens. So you do this. So you have 500 patients, but this time you're randomizing them. So you're getting rid of that selection bias where the sicker patients get antibiotics. And you've said in your trial you only look at the well patients. So half of them get antibiotics and half of them don't get antibiotics. And if you look at them, only 2% of patients in each group, so they're the same. There's no difference between antibiotic use and whether they die or not. So you've got rid of the selection bias that is causing that. And this goes on to be published in the Lancet, and you're known as a very famous researcher. And it makes sense, doesn't it? You can't really see how antibiotics might cause people to drop dead. I mean, there might be very toxic antibiotics, that could be quite plausible. But you can't see how previously safe drugs were killing people. And that's really important. There's some times where we can't actually do this. So for example, GlobalSurg 1, which we discussed briefly earlier, we looked at differences in the mortality across different countries, and we classified these according to how rich or poor the countries were. And so we had 10,000 patients undergoing surgery, and we found that mortality and wound infection went up as the countries got more poor. And so how did we find that? How surely is there a selection bias going on there? Well, there might well be. There might well be. And so how did we kind of control for that? Well, we'll come on to that in a bit, but there's a thing called adjusting. So you can adjust for different variables. Now, if we decided we didn't want to have any selection bias whatsoever, wanted to kind of get rid of that, we could have done a randomized trial to see if there are differences in mortality across different countries where patients undergo surgery. So, for example, this is something we could have done, but you'll see very quickly it wasn't possible at all. So if we took, for example, 500 patients who are undergoing surgery, and we said to those patients, depending on which country they were in, so if they were in a well-developed country like the USA, so if we said to the patients in the USA, half of you will get surgery in the USA, but the other half we'll send to a much poorer country, and we'll see how you do. We'll see if you're more likely to die, and that way you're getting rid of all the confounding factors and things, and you're just looking at whether country is associated or is related to mortality. But you'd never be able to do that because you'd, first of all, logistically, so in terms of transport, you'd have to take those patients and fly them all the way to a poor country for them to then have their surgery. Or, quite simply, it would be unethical. So those patients who are flying to other countries, you wouldn't be allowed to do that study because of the perceived risk, and not a lot of patients would say, yes, I want to do that, I want to have my surgery in a poorer place. So how could you get rid of this? How did we get rid of this selection bias, or this kind of all these different sources of problems in GlobalSurg 1? Well, the answer is you can never get rid of it all. And this is something you need to really kind of recognize in observational research. You can though, there are ways of adjusting for certain factors. So in our studies, we collect a lot of data on how well they are before their or patients are before their operation, on their age, on lots of different things that we know can make a difference to outcomes after surgery. The next most important thing, apart from collecting all these kind of covariates that we can, these different factors that we can adjust patient outcomes with, is to collect accurate data. And this is one of the probably the strongest points of our studies, where we do it in a looking forward manner. So instead of looking at notes and lots of things that have happened in the past, we look at it in real time. So we recruit the patients to the studies, and we follow them up every day and see how they're doing. So that's what we call prospective. Because it's prospective, you're more likely to get more accurate data at that point in time. We can then use these accurate data points and adjust for patient factors. So we said in GlobalSurg 1, for example, that their age and how sick they are before they have the operation is important. So we're adjusting for that the patient risk. So we know that older people are more likely to die after operations, and more sick people are likely to die after operations. So we adjusted for that. But then we thought, okay, we want to know differences between how poor and how rich a country is, but we don't really care about the differences between the hospitals in the countries. So we adjusted for the country as well. So we're trying to eliminate different sources of potentially confounding variables, just so we can look at what we're interested in specifically. And that's quite complex statistics behind that, and you can learn a lot more about that on the internet. There's some very good resources, and also just by doing it, and also going up to people and asking, "Or can I get involved in this analysis?" Or finding people to interact with, and things like this as well. Webinars and sessions like that. The next most important thing, really, after you've got your results and you know how they're kind of formatted, is to present them. Like Dimitri was saying, it's important to make things clear and understandable. So the first thing is you need to be very clear, and you avoid repetition. So if you've got results in a table, there's no point having them in a graph and then in the text of your beautifully written paper. Have them in one place and refer back to them. So if you say, have a table with the results in, and say, please see table 1 for this result. The next most important thing is also to present your findings with a well-known measure, such as something like risk, or you can also have odds as well. And doing that means that doctors can understand basic measures of what you've done and really translate it into to the patient. So if you went and did a study that said that patients who were who were overweight were more likely to have a wound infection by, say, 2 times. You could then take that to your clinic and you could say to patients who are overweight, well, you are undergoing surgery, and because you are slightly overweight, you are twice as likely to have a wound infection, and that's a recognised risk. So you can take these and you can really translate them into patient care. Present your findings. So if you have a risk, so you say it's 2 times the amount, you need to present it with something called a confidence interval, which is a measure of how confident we are that number is the correct number. So the true value. So the true value is the actual effects. And so your confidence interval is how uncertain you are. So you might say you're overweight and you're twice as likely to have a wound infection after you have surgery, but we're not quite sure about that. So you might be 1.5 times, between 1.5 times and 3.5 times, but in the middle you are twice as likely. So we're going to say that's our number we're going to go with for our overall measure. The next thing, often journals have a very clear guidance on how you should be presenting your statistics, and there are checklists and guides available online as well. And quite often, actually, it's quite boring and quite dull to read through pages and pages of numbers. And so sometimes a graph tells a lot more in a much shorter space, and can also add a lot more to your paper. For example, here we have a graph. This shows the number of Twitter users and the number of Flickr users in the United States. And you can see that the Twitter is in white and blue, and it's really quite beautiful. And here you can see where the cities are. Here you can see where the main roads are, and it'd be very, very difficult to describe this properly using numbers. So graphs are very, very useful. The next thing that people often have trouble with is association versus causation, and that's very important. Also, we'll talk about p-values. So p-values, I'm sure everyone's seen them, or if you read a scientific paper, you'll see this thing called a p-value next to almost everything in medicine. And it was devised by this man who's called Ronald Fisher, who is a statistics guru in the early 1900s. And a p-value really describes how likely are your findings how likely your findings are that they're due to chance, rather than actually being a true effect. And so Fisher plucked a number out of the air, so said 0.05, and that really means, so 0.05 is 1/20th of 1, and so if your p-value was 1, you'd say these findings are very likely down to chance and that there really is no difference between these groups. Whereas if you said your p-value was 0.05, you're saying that there is a 1 in 20 chance that the finding in your study is down to chance. So 19 times out of 20, there is an actual association between 2 variables or 2 factors. And why did Fisher choose 0.5 rather than 0.06 or 0.04? No one really knows. He just plucked that value out of the air. So when using p-values, be very, very careful, because they often don't actually show true levels of effect, and they can mislead. So association versus causation is a very, very common problem, and you see it in some journals where the authors will declare, so look at our amazing study, our p-values are less than 0.05, and it's fantastic. This means that this thing we're looking at definitely causes this to happen. And the thing is, you can't actually ever say that. You can say things are likely to cause things, and you can propose mechanisms, unless you do a proper randomized study or a study in the laboratory. And you need to be really careful with these terminologies. So in observational studies, for example, findings are associations. So if one thing goes up and one thing goes up, or one thing goes down when that thing goes up, so for example in GlobalSurg, where you got more poor countries and mortality goes up, it's not necessarily that countries are poor, so that causes death. There might be lots of other factors that you haven't recorded that might cause that problem as well. So for example in lung cancer, or we do a study of 1,000 people, and we find that the smokers are significantly more likely, so the p-value is less than 0.05, more likely to have lung cancer. But we can't say that it causes it. We can just say that smokers are more likely to have lung cancer. And we might not have collected other variables, such as whether they worked in a dusty environment or whether they worked with asbestos. So we're really missing the key points. So to demonstrate causation, or demonstrate that causation is more likely, so something will actually cause something else to happen. For example, with the smoking example, you could do a randomized study. You could say to 100 people, 50 of you can smoke and 50 of you won't ever smoke, and we'll see what happens to those 50. Although that study would never get ethically approved, it would likely show you that if everything else was kept the same, those 50 people would go on to develop lung cancer and the other 50 people were less likely to. The other way you could do it is you could go to the laboratory and you could look at the chemicals in cigarettes and isolate every single one of them and test them on human lung cells in a test tube, and you could look at the differences in the cells and whether they become cancerous or not. And you could then say, well, we've measured this chemical against this, and we can find that this pathway, this chemical in this cell, causes cancer. So in summary, this has been a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of statistics, and importantly, there's lots and lots of different tests, things we haven't covered. Quite often, statistical tests are done in software such as SPSS and R, but you can also do it in quite basic software as well. So if you have Microsoft Excel, that has lots of different functions for statistical tests, and the free version in OpenOffice does too. Most importantly though, make sure you think about where your sources of bias could come from and how you might kind of take those into account during your analysis. Good design is always leads to better statistics, and also make sure your comparisons are valid and are reasonable, and then make sure you can present those in a nice format so you can get published. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. So I think Chetan has just also joined in on the call. Not quite sure who's next, Chetan, or who you had lined up next to speak.
So I think that was the end of the session. I think both have some key speakers.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll end it there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Just before we go,
yeah.
could you just say a big thanks to everyone who's attended. It's been, as I'm sure people who were here at the start realised, we've not really ever done this before, and it's fantastic to talk to people across the world, really. If you want to get involved in GlobalSurg too, you can go to our website, www.globalsurg.org, and you can sign up there, and it would be really good to get involved. And even if you can't recruit patients or can't get involved in the study for some reason, just you can get involved. You can talk to us. You can follow us on Twitter, and we'd love to hear from you.
I guess I've got a question, since I can ask one. I have the power to be able to speak. My question was on how you choose your location to get patient data from. Are you, say if I'm a medical student but I happen to be, so for instance my parents live in the Washington DC area, can I then take information from a hospital there, or does it have to be kind of from whichever medical school I'm studying at?
So that's a really good question. Obviously it depends where you are in the world, because different countries have different standards and different rules. In the UK, for example, I couldn't go home to London and start collecting data, just walk into hospital and start collecting data, because I wouldn't be either registered to work there, or that would be illegal. But for example, I'm in Sheffield, which is a city in the north. I can go into hospitals there, and because I'm a medical student at that university, and they've already agreed that I can go and look at data and collect it because I'm involved in that patient's clinical care, that's okay. And I have to, before I start collecting data, I have to get lots of approvals as well. So you need to have either an audit or research approval to do it, and then permission from the institution, so like the hospital, to upload it to our system as well. But once those two things are in place, that's perfectly fine.
So I think the key thing is that you can collect data wherever you like. It doesn't. For example, when medical students from the UK go abroad on their electives, they can collect data abroad. But the important thing is that they need to have the permission of the hospital where they're collecting the data from to firstly collect it and secondly upload it online to our database. Okay. So it really doesn't matter where you are. You can contribute from anywhere in the world as long as you've got the permission of the surgical team where you're based and the hospital.
Okay. All right. And Chetan, I just saw your text. You would like me to open up the questions components of the chat?
Yeah. So if any of the people that are attending want to ask a question to our panels, they can do so. But I noticed the question thing is disabled.
Where's the question?
Whilst we're waiting, Chetan, maybe you can remind us when the next one of these sessions is going to be?
So the next one is going to be in 2 weeks' time. It's going to be held on the 19th, which is a Saturday at 5 p.m. again, and at 5 p.m. GMT, that is, so calculated to your local time.
And what will the talks be?
So again, there'll be 2 sessions running at the same time. There'll be a core session. In the core session, we'll talk about levels of study evidence. So, and I will go through different types of studies and how they're designed and what makes them one type of study compared to another. There'll also be a practical component in that session, which is how to write an abstract, and we'll give you tips and tricks on how to write your abstracts and different mistakes to make, or different mistakes not to make, in fact. We've got the advanced session, which is this one here, the second part of that. In that we'll have critical appraisal and how to go around critically appraising literature to apply that into your own practice, and then another talk on how to search the literature when you're doing literature searches or aiming to do a systematic review.
Thanks, Chetan. We've just had a question come through from Rana. Sorry if I can't pronounce your name right. Who says, "Thank you. Will you provide us with more instructions about GlobalSurg 2?" And she thinks it's still a little bit unclear of how to go about doing GlobalSurg 2. Have you got any three top ways of things you've got to do in order to do GlobalSurg 2 for Rana?
So I think
sorry.
For Rana, the key thing is go to the website www.globalsurg.org and you can find the protocol for GlobalSurg 2 online, and in that protocol there's very detailed information about how you should go about setting up your hospital to be included in GlobalSurg 2, and also what the study is actually about, what patients you're going to be collecting data on. And I'm not sure if you have a different language to English, but on our website we've got the protocol translated to some of the other languages as well.
And then finally, just to add, on the website as well, you can register for our project. So if you put your email down, you'll be kept in touch with all our emails and updates about the project and next steps. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at inquiry@globalsurg.org, and we'll answer any questions that you have.
And you can get in touch with us on Twitter too. If you just search for GlobalSurg on Twitter, we'll come up, and we'll happily chat to you or whatever. If you want to Skype at any point, we're more than happy to call as well.
And also, in each country, there will be a local lead who's responsible for running GlobalSurg in their country. So this will be like a GlobalSurg expert, somebody who spends a lot of time on the study, and so there'll be a good contact locally to get information about how to register the study in your own country. If you don't have a GlobalSurg local lead, then that's a fantastic opportunity for you to get involved. So get in touch and we'll see if you can set yourself up as the local lead.
And we've had another question, Tom. So
Yeah.
Nasmin has asked us that she doesn't understand bias. So would you please just explain it again for her benefit and for the benefit of others who I'm sure also are in the same situation?
No problem. Thanks, Jet, and thanks, Nasman, for the question. Bias is quite complicated. It's quite a fancy word, but really, bias boils down to something being more likely to happen, and something that you don't really take into account during your study. So, for example, if you would, Nasman, you were doing a study looking at pain after surgery, and you didn't record something, so you wanted to know whether having painkillers after surgery helps improve pain, but you didn't take into account the type of surgery people were having. That might be a source of bias. There's some really good explanations online, and essentially bias is just something that will affect the results of your study that you might not take into account properly during your analysis. There's lots of different things online, and if you want to ask me on Twitter, I can send you some things through. My Twitter is Tom_Drake1, or you can go onto the GlobalSurg one and I'll answer you there. We've also just got another question from Gloria, who asks, how soon will the training module on your website be made available?
So to answer that question, the training modules have now been produced and we're just in the process of uploading them onto the website. They should probably be there within the next week or so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We're just kind of refining a couple of them just to make them sure they're really clear and understandable, and so you can take that and you can really use it in your participation in GlobalSurg too. So hopefully next few days.
Okay, great. So we're just waiting if there's any other questions before the session draws to a close.
We've now got 44 viewers, so thank you for joining us. Have a look at the core course. How many people have they got?
So I think we had about 25 people who joined the course at the start, and by the end we were up to about 30.
Oh, it's better than the other way around. It's better than 25 people going to none.
Exactly.
So 112 people on the other course, and then we've got 44 people on the advanced, which is fantastic. Oh, here we go. Belinda Williams asks, do we get participation certificates for this session? That's a very good question.
So for the participation certificates, we run the second half of the course, which will be done in 2 weeks' time. If you can make it to that, then that's great. You can watch it there, and then afterwards we'll send you a form to fill in about how the session was, and if you thought that was useful or not. And then once you send us that form, we'll have your details, and then we can send you a certificate out through an email. Brilliant. If you're not able to make it next week, the webinar will be published online on YouTube. Once it's been published on YouTube, if you watch that, if you have any questions, get in touch with us. But again, the same system would follow. We'll send out a form, in which case, please just put your name and your email address down, and we'll give you a certificate for the entire thing.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Nasman says, thank you. That's so nice for you. It was great. Thanks, Nasman. Have we got any more questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up there. No? Okay, fantastic. Are we happy to wrap up there, everyone?
Sounds good. Thank you very much, everyone.
If there are any more questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, or of course, with IFMSA, and let us know how you thought today went. what else we could do. What if you have any specific questions that you have, or any specific topics that you want us to talk about, and I'm sure we can go around answering them.
Brilliant. And if you want to sign up for GlobalSurg too, you can go to globalsurg.org /register, and you can sign up online there. It'd be great to work with you, and also really deliver something that can change patient care across the world and really improve things. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and it's
and next time everything will go a lot more smoothly as
Yeah, I
well.
was going to say, I think
Yeah,
now I've got the hang of everything, and we'll post the links up shortly, at some point during next week for the next kind of Hangout air. And
can we edit out the beginning?
we can definitely edit out the beginning. Yeah, I'll do some smooth YouTube editing before that.
Fantastic. So everyone watching knows it went really smoothly.
Thank you very much from Mike from IFSSA who set this up and for inviting us to speak, and
Yeah,
we're
no, very
grateful for that.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, and sorry for the little technical difficulties at the beginning, but I think it went well in the end.
That's okay.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.